Picture this moment when you're scrolling through a group chat buzzing with excitement about an upscale dinner in the heart of Silicon Valley. The kind of event where deals get whispered over glasses of overpriced wine and connections solidify under the guise of casual conversation, only to receive a message that slices right through your confidence like a poorly negotiated contract, stating without apology that the gathering is reserved exclusively for those who've already crossed the threshold of undeniable success, leaving you on the outside looking in, wondering if all those years of grinding through late nights and overlooked pitches have amounted to nothing more than an invisible barrier you can't quite scale. That was exactly how my evening unfolded a few months ago, back when the fog clung stubbornly to the San Francisco Bay and the air carried that electric hum of possibility mixed with the sharp tang of rejection, transforming what should have been a night of celebration into a solitary vigil that would unexpectedly rewrite the trajectory of my professional life in ways I could never have anticipated, all while forcing me to confront the harsh realities of a world that measures worth by banked fortunes rather than quiet determination. My name is Elena Vasquez, and at 46, with a resume built from the ground up starting from a modest upbringing in East Los Angeles, where every opportunity felt like it had to be wrestled from reluctant hands, I had poured everything into launching Vasquez AI, a platform designed to empower small businesses drowning in the data overload from corporate giants, believing that persistence would eventually crack open the doors guarded by the elite networks that dominated the tech landscape. The snub arrived via text from Lisa Hargrove, a former colleague turned high society fixture in the Bay Area scene. Someone I had once guided through the treacherous waters of early career setbacks when we both toiled in the underbelly of software development firms, sharing frustrated laughs over coffee about the endless cycle of being undervalued in boardrooms filled with men who dismissed innovative ideas from women like us as mere novelties rather than game changers. Over the years, as her career skyrocketed with the launch of a slick marketing tool that catered to influencer empires and secured her a spot among the venture-backed elite, she had curated this exclusive circle of about a dozen influencers, including Mark Riley, the venture capitalist whose portfolio read like a who's who of unicorn startups and who never missed a chance to regale gatherings with tales of his shrewd investments that bordered on the boastful, and Sarah Klein, the polished consultant who had transformed her post-divorce windfall into a thriving advisory firm serving only the upper echelons of tech society, her invitations to events like this one serving as subtle badges of status that separated the climbers from the peaked. The message she sent was deceptively lighthearted, laced with just enough faux regret to sting without outright rudeness, explaining that the dinner at the Grove, that swanky spot overlooking the marina where power lunches stretched into power dinners, was being kept intimate for those who had closed significant funding rounds in the past quarter, implying with crystal clarity that my ongoing negotiations, though promising, hadn't yet translated into the tangible millions that granted entry to their rarefied air, a exclusion that echoed the countless times I had been sidelined in conference hallways or passed over for panels, because my achievements were still in the making rather than minted in headlines. Sitting there in my compact home office cluttered with prototypes of algorithms scribbled on whiteboards and stacks of legal documents that represented months of sleepless refinement, I felt the weight of that dismissal settle over me like an uninvited fog, reminding me of the immigrant roots that had instilled a fierce independence, but also a lingering sensitivity to being cast as the perpetual outsider in America's promise of equal opportunity, especially in a field like tech where diversity stats were trotted out for PR but rarely reflected in the real power structures. Part of me itched to respond with a sharp retort, something laced with the dry humor that had gotten me through tougher rejections, like pointing out that true success might lie in building something lasting rather than chasing fleeting validations from echo chambers of the already affluent, but I held back, recognizing that in this high-stakes game, emotional outbursts could derail delicate progress more effectively than any intentional sabotage, so instead I channeled the frustration into focus by ordering a hearty portion of Thai basil chicken from the neighborhood spot that always delivered with reliability. its spicy aroma soon filling the space as I cleared the table to lay out the non-disclosure agreements from the investment consortium led by David Langford, a understated titan in the venture world whose interest in my platform had been simmering for nearly a year without the fanfare that accompanied flashier deals. As I savored the meal alone under the soft glow of a single desk lamp, the cityscape beyond my window twinkling with the distant lights of lives intertwining in ways mine momentarily wasn't, I reviewed the terms one final time. The clauses outlining a partnership that would inject $120 million into Vasquez AI, enabling nationwide rollout of tools that democratized advanced analytics for the very small enterprises overlooked by Silicon Valley's behemoths, a validation of the vision I had nurtured through personal sacrifices, including a strained marriage with my husband Tom, who was currently on a consulting assignment in Seattle and often bore the brunt of my absences, and the ongoing management of a thyroid condition that sapped my energy during critical pushes like this one. Signing the documents felt like sealing a pact with my own resilience, each pen stroke a quiet defiance against the evening's slight, and by the time I hit send on the encrypted email to David's team, the clock had ticked past midnight, leaving me with a profound sense of solitude that was equal parts empowering and isolating. As if the universe had orchestrated this uninvited night to strip away distractions and force a confrontation with the raw ambition driving me forward. I didn't broadcast the milestone, not even to Tom in a late-night call where he sensed my subdued tone but attributed it to fatigue, because discretion was the currency of survival in an industry rife with leaks and opportunists. And I wanted this win to unfold on my terms, untainted by premature applause. The following morning shattered the quiet with my phone erupting in vibrations, a cascade of notifications from contacts who had gone radio silent for weeks, each message dripping with the kind of effusive congratulations that rang hollow against the backdrop of their prior indifference. Starting with Lisa's frantic text expressing shock at the TechCrunch headline proclaiming Vasquez AI's monumental deal and inquiring how I had managed to keep such a bombshell under wraps, followed closely by Mark's polished overture suggesting we discuss potential collaborations now that our paths were aligning in the winner's circle, and Sarah's stream of emojis accompanying an invitation to lunch, as if the dinner exclusion had been a mere oversight in the grand scheme of networking. It was almost laughable, this rapid pivot from dismissal to desperation, a testament to how quickly fortunes could flip in the volatile world of tech entrepreneurship, where yesterday's outsider becomes tomorrow's envy. Yet amid the influx, one message stood out from an unfamiliar number, its brevity cutting through the noise with ominous precision. Congratulations on the deal, Elena, but be cautious. They've been discussing ways to undermine it from within. The ambiguity of who they referred to and the nature of the threat hung in the air like an unresolved chord, propelling me into a day fraught with questions about loyalties long assumed solid and the hidden machinations that might still lurk in the shadows of my newfound success. That cryptic message from the unknown number lingered in my mind like an unresolved glitch in a complex algorithm, pulling my focus away from the celebratory buzz of the incoming notifications and forcing me to sift through the layers of insincerity that now flooded my inbox, each one a carefully crafted attempt to retroactively claim a piece of my victory as if their exclusion the night before had been nothing more than a temporary oversight in the intricate dance of professional alliances that defined life in the competitive undercurrents of Silicon Valley. Lisa's subsequent texts evolved into a full-blown narrative rewrite, insisting that she had always rooted for my breakthrough and framing the dinner as an unfortunate scheduling conflict rather than the deliberate gatekeeping it clearly represented. Her words painting a picture of unwavering support that clashed sharply with the reality of her message, dismissing me for lacking the visible markers of success, a hypocrisy that almost drew a bitter laugh from me as I imagined her in her sunlit kitchen in Palo Alto, surrounded by the trappings of her own ascent, frantically adjusting her story to align with the shifting winds of relevance now that my name dominated the morning headlines. Mark followed suit with an email that oozed calculated enthusiasm, proposing an informal chat about leveraging our mutual networks for future synergies, his language polished to the point of evasion as he sidestepped any acknowledgement of the snub, instead positioning himself as a longtime admirer whose portfolio could complement my platform's expansion into untapped markets for small business analytics, while Sarah opted for a more personal approach with a voicemail laced with that performative sisterhood tone so common among women navigating the male-dominated tech sphere, gushing about how my deal served as inspiration for underdogs everywhere and suggesting we grab coffee to swap stories, her voice carrying an undercurrent of urgency that betrayed her fear of being left behind in the wake of my sudden elevation. Pushing aside the digital deluge for a moment to ground myself, I brewed a pot of strong Colombian coffee, the rich aroma filling my apartment and providing a brief anchor amid the whirlwind. Because the true echoes of that uninvited evening reverberated not just in the present flood of flattery, but in the backstory of how this exclusive clique had coalesced over the past several years. A formation that traced back to a Women in Tech conference 5 years earlier where Lisa and I had first connected deeply. Both of us then mid-level players frustrated by the systemic barriers that forced us to prove our worth twice over in pitch meetings dominated by skeptical venture capitalists who viewed female-led innovations with a mix of curiosity and condescension. At that event, held in a sprawling convention center overlooking the bay with sessions on everything from blockchain ethics to inclusive hiring practices, we had bonded over shared experiences of being interrupted or undervalued. Exchanging contact info after a panel on startup funding where I had advocated for platforms like mine that leveled the playing field for minority-owned businesses, and in the months that followed, I had gone out of my way to introduce her to key figures in my nascent network, including David Langford, the discerning investor whose quiet endorsement now underpinned my $120 million deal, believing that lifting each other up was the antidote to the isolation so many women faced in this cutthroat industry. Yet as Lisa's career gained momentum with the debut of her influencer analytics app, which quickly attracted blue-chip clients and positioned her as a go-to consultant for viral marketing strategies, she began to gravitate toward the inner sanctum of established players, events like the dinner at the Grove becoming symbols of her arrival where conversations revolved around seven-figure exits and insider tips on the next big regulatory shift, while Mark Riley served as the unofficial ringleader, his venture firm funding a string of high-profile startups that he leveraged to curate these gatherings as extensions of his deal-making empire, complete with anecdotes about outmaneuvering competitors that bordered on the arrogant, and Sarah Klein entered the fold shortly after her contentious divorce from a serial entrepreneur, using her settlement to launch a niche advisory service that catered exclusively to C-suite executives navigating post-IPO challenges, her presence adding a layer of social polish to the group as she hosted follow-up brunches that solidified their bonds. I had attended a handful of those early dinners myself, enduring the undercurrents of comparison where my bootstrapped approach to Vasquez AI was subtly contrasted with their venture-fueled trajectories. Comments about the risks of self-funding coming across as concern, but landing like veiled judgments on my pace, until gradually the invitations tapered off, replaced by these offhand exclusions that eroded the camaraderie we once shared and left me questioning whether my emphasis on ethical AI for underserved markets made me seem too idealistic or insufficiently aggressive in the eyes of those who prioritized rapid scaling over sustainable impact. The family dimension amplified the emotional undercurrents that morning when Tom called from his hotel in Seattle, his voice warm with genuine pride over the TechCrunch article that detailed how my platform's predictive tools could transform inventory management for retailers hit hard by supply chain disruptions, yet threaded with the subtle concern he had carried since my thyroid diagnosis 2 years prior, a condition that manifested in waves of exhaustion and required careful management amid the relentless demands of entrepreneurship, prompting him to ask if I was pacing myself now that the pressure might ease, to which I responded with reassuring optimism about finally affording that long-overdue family trip we had postponed too many times. even as inwardly I grappled with the choice to remain silent on the snub, a decision that felt like self-imposed exile, but also preserved the energy I needed for the deal's rollout. Opting for solitude that night had spared me the drain of navigating their pretentious dynamics, where every toast masked an agenda, but it also underscored the personal toll of ambition, making me reflect on how many evenings Tom and I had spent apart because my focus stayed locked on the next milestone, a pattern that now, in the glow of success, invited a reevaluation of what truly constituted winning. In a life balance between boardrooms and home, channeling the mix of vindication and vulnerability into action, I crafted my initial response to the onslaught with a touch of wry satisfaction, uploading a simple LinkedIn post featuring a photo of the empty takeout container from my solo dinner, accompanied by a caption that read, "Sometimes the most productive evenings happen away from the crowd, where ideas flourish without interruption, leading to breakthroughs that speak for themselves," a subtle nod to the exclusion without naming culprits, timed perfectly to coincide with the article's peak virality and drawing immediate engagement from a broader network of fellow entrepreneurs who had endured similar slights, their comments validating the underdog ethos that fueled my journey. Lisa reacted publicly with a supportive emoji string, but a quick check of mutual connections revealed her private inquiry to a shared acquaintance about whether the post was aimed at her, confirming that the seed of unease had taken root in their insulated world, a clever form of retribution that exacted payback through implication rather than accusation, allowing me to reclaim the narrative on my terms while avoiding the backlash of direct confrontation. The momentum of that small win carried me through the afternoon until another alert shattered the fragile calm, this one in forwarded email from a trusted former colleague who had stumbled upon a group chat excerpt originating from their circle, detailing discussions on how to counter my ascendance by influencing David's consortium with doubts about my platform's long-term viability, the language laced with phrases like disrupting the established order that hinted at coordinated efforts to protect their own stakes, and the attachment included timestamps aligning suspiciously with the dinner's timeframe, raising the chilling possibility that the exclusion had been more than social. It was the prelude to a deliberate attempt to sabotage the very deal that now threatened their dominance. The forwarded email from my former colleague burned on my screen like an exposed wire sparking in the dim light of my apartment, its contents unraveling a tapestry of calculated malice that transformed the initial sting of exclusion into a full-spectrum assault on the foundations of my burgeoning success, revealing not just personal slights, but a coordinated strategy among the clique to safeguard their entrenched positions by sowing seeds of doubt within David's investment circle, all while I had been naively focused on the mechanics of the deal rather than the interpersonal machinations that could unravel it before the first wire transfer cleared. Phrases like ensuring stability for proven players and mitigating risks from unvetted disruptors jumped out in Mark's initiating message, timestamped mere hours after the dinner's start, suggesting that the gathering had doubled as a brainstorming session for containment tactics against upstarts like me whose platforms challenge the status quo of analytics tools dominated by their funded ventures, with Lisa contributing a follow-up endorsing the approach through her marketing lens by proposing subtle PR campaigns to highlight potential flaws in my AI's data privacy protocols, and Sarah weighing in with legal caveats about intellectual property overlaps that she claimed to have spotted in preliminary reviews, her input carrying the weight of her advisory credentials even as it masked a deeper envy over my independent trajectory that bypassed the very networks she now policed. This discovery hit harder than the initial snub because it exposed the fragility of alliances in tech, where trust was as volatile as stock options and every connection harbored the potential for betrayal, forcing me to confront how my emphasis on ethical, accessible AI for small businesses had unwittingly positioned me as a threat to their lucrative ecosystems built on premium services for corporate clients, a realization that blended righteous anger with a pragmatic caution about escalating too soon without irrefutable leverage. Needing neutral territory to process the implications without the walls of my home closing in, I headed to the corner coffee shop that afternoon, A cozy haven tucked between startup incubators with its mismatched armchairs and the constant murmur of freelancers hashing out code, where the scent of freshly ground beans offered a momentary reprieve from the acrid taste of deception, allowing me to spread out printouts of the email on a scarred wooden table while nursing a double espresso that sharpened my focus amid the growing haze of uncertainty about who else might be compromised in my extended network. It was there, amid the clatter of laptops and half-whispered pitches, that I unexpectedly crossed paths with Javier Ruiz, a software engineer who had collaborated with me during the nascent stages of Vasquez AI before jumping ship 2 years earlier for a senior role at one of Mark's flagship portfolio companies. His arrival at the next table over prompting a nod of recognition that evolved into an invitation to join me, his expression a mix of genuine congratulations on the deal and a hesitancy that hinted at insider knowledge he was weighing whether to share. As we settled into conversation, reminiscing about the chaotic early prototypes we had debugged together in rented co-working spaces overlooking the bustling streets of San Francisco, where dreams of democratizing tech felt tangible yet perpetually out of reach, Javier gradually opened up about the fractures within the clique that the leaked email only partially illuminated, describing how Mark's domineering style had alienated Lisa by funneling clients away from her firm under the guise of internal synergies, while Sarah maneuvered in the shadows to exploit the discord for her own consulting gigs, positioning herself as the mediator who profited from their conflicts. A dynamic that made their united front against me seem less like solidarity and more like a desperate facade to mask individual insecurities, in an industry where one misstep could cascade into obsolescence. This glimpse into their infighting presented a moral crossroads that tugged at my resolve, tempting me to exploit the divisions by reaching out to Lisa directly with the email as ammunition, potentially fracturing their group from within and securing my position. Yet the dilemma deepened when Javier alluded to his own regrets over leaving my team, confessing that Mark's promises of equity had soured into overwork and micromanagement, leaving him sympathetic to my plight but wary of burning bridges that still paid his mortgage in the exorbitantly priced Bay Area. The vulnerability of the moment was compounded by a sudden flare of pain in my neck as the afternoon wore on, a stark reminder of the thyroid imbalance that had first surfaced during a particularly grueling funding round 2 years back, manifesting in erratic energy levels that I had masked with sheer willpower to avoid appearing weak in negotiations. But now, with the deal's pressures mounting alongside this fresh betrayal, it forced a painful introspection about the sustainability of my path, wondering if pushing through the discomfort without medical intervention was a badge of strength or a reckless gamble that could sideline me just as victory beckoned. A choice that might draw disagreement from those hearing my story, who could argue for prioritizing health over the elusive rush of professional validation in a culture that glorified the hustle at all costs. In that coffee-scented sanctuary, staring at the email's damning lines while Javier excused himself to take a call, I felt the weight of potential isolation if I pursued aggressive countermeasures. Yet the alternative of passive endurance chafed against the fighter's instinct honed from years of navigating biases as a Latina entrepreneur in spaces not designed for someone with my background, ultimately steering me toward a measured retaliation that balanced wit with wisdom. Harnessing the unease into purposeful action, I composed an anonymous submission to a prominent industry newsletter known for exposing behind-the-scenes drama in venture circles, framing the leaked email as a cautionary tale of network rivalries stifling innovation without attributing specifics to individuals or companies, the narrative carefully worded to imply broader systemic issues while planting just enough detail to make Mark's firm the focal point of speculation. A clever stroke of revenge that would ripple through their world via bylines and shares without implicating me directly, allowing the public scrutiny to do the heavy lifting of accountability. By evening, as the article went live and comments began to accumulate with insiders piecing together the connections, the satisfaction of watching Mark's LinkedIn activity spike with defensive reposts provided a cathartic lift, his attempts to spin the piece as sour grapes only amplifying the doubt among his peers. Yet the Triumph was tempered by the persistent ache in my body and the lingering questions about Javier's loyalties, as he had slipped me a business card with a note to call if things escalated, hinting at deeper involvement he wasn't ready to disclose. Returning home under the deepening twilight, with Tom still en route from Seattle and the apartment echoing with solitude, my phone shattered the reflective quiet with an incoming call from Javier himself. His tone laced with urgency as he warned that the clique's response to the article was mobilizing faster than anticipated, targeting a vulnerability in my deal's core structure that could expose proprietary algorithms to competitive scrutiny, leaving me frozen in the doorway with the key still in the lock, heart racing at the precipice of a threat that demanded immediate action, yet blurred the lines between ally and adversary in ways that promised to redefine the shadows closing in around my hard-won empire. Javier's urgent call that evening reverberated through the quiet confines of my apartment like an alarm signaling the approach of an unseen storm. His words tumbling out in a hushed rush that detailed how the clique's inner workings had accelerated in response to the newsletter article, with Mark rallying his contacts to probe weaknesses in my platform's patent filings, while Lisa leveraged her PR machine to seed subtle narratives questioning the deal's stability among secondary investors, all of which positioned the uninvited dinner as merely the visible tip of a submerged iceberg designed to capsize my momentum before it could fully crest into the $120 million validation that now hung in precarious balance. Hanging up with a promise to regroup soon, I paced the living room floor under the soft illumination of city lights filtering through the windows, the polished hardwood cool against my bare feet as the implications settled in, transforming the initial thrill of anonymous exposure into a heightened state of vigilance where every alliance felt provisional and every silence potentially loaded with ulterior motives, compelling me to weigh the risks of isolation against the uncertainties of trust in an ecosystem where betrayals often masqueraded as collaborations. The fatigue from my thyroid condition pulsed insistently in my temples, a physical echo of the emotional toll that made me question the wisdom of continuing this solitary battle. Yet the fire of defiance that had carried me from East Los Angeles classrooms to Stanford's competitive halls refused to dim, pushing me toward strategic outreach rather than retreat, because in the high-stakes arena of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship, standing still invited encirclement while calculated risks could turn the tide toward empowerment. Determined to fortify my position without alerting the adversaries directly, I initiated contact with Rebecca Thorne the following morning, a formidable intellectual property lawyer whose reputation preceded her like a shield in the cutthroat legal battles of tech startups. Having built her practice on dismantling predatory non-competes and exposing venture fund manipulations that preyed on underrepresented founders, her no-nonsense demeanor and track record of securing multi-million-dollar settlements making her an ideal counterweight to the clique's shadowy tactics. We had met sporadically at industry mixers over the years, exchanging cards after discussions on diversity in funding where she had shared anecdotes of her own exclusions from elite bar associations dominated by old guard attorneys. And though our paths hadn't deeply intertwined, her subtle criticisms of Lisa's firm during one such event, accusing it of underhanded client poaching, had planted the seed of mutual respect, prompting me to schedule an urgent video conference where I laid out the leaked email and newsletter fallout without withholding the personal undercurrents of the dinner snub that had ignited the chain reaction. Rebecca's response was measured yet incisive, her sharp features framed by bookshelves of case law volumes as she dissected the sabotage angles with the precision of a surgeon, noting how Mark's influence over David's secondary backers could indeed exploit gaps in my IP documentation if not addressed preemptively, while proposing a joint audit of the deal's clauses that would not only neutralize the threats, but also position me to countersue for interference if evidence of collusion surfaced. Her alliance emerging as a lifeline that blended professional acumen with a shared disdain for gatekeeping, though it introduced its own dilemma in the form of divided loyalties since Javier had mentioned her past consultations with Sarah, leaving me to ponder whether this partnership fortified my defenses or merely added another layer of potential vulnerability in the intricate web of connections defining my ascent. As the ripples from the newsletter continued to spread throughout the day, evidenced by a surge in my social feeds with commentators dissecting the rivalry-stifling innovation theme and tagging players whose profiles matched the anonymous hints. The satisfaction of witnessing Mark's online composure fracture into terse rebuttals provided a fleeting sense of poetic justice, his posts laced with indignation that only fueled further speculation among peers who had long chafed under his self-appointed gatekeeper role, while Lisa issued a boilerplate statement on her firm's site emphasizing ethical competition that rang as disingenuous as her post-snub overtures, underscoring how the clever indirection of my tip had amplified their discomfort without requiring me to step into the fray personally. The true escalation arrived unannounced in the late afternoon when Sarah Klein appeared at my doorstep, her tailored blazer slightly askew from the drive over the bridge and her expression a calculated blend of contrition and calculation that suggested she had come not just to mend fences, but to assess the damage firsthand, ringing the bell with a persistence that drew me to answer despite the instinct to ignore it, leading to an awkward invitation inside where we settled in the kitchen amid the remnants of my untouched lunch, the air thick with the unspoken history of our shared circles now fractured by ambition's unforgiving logic. Over steaming mugs of herbal tea that I hoped would soothe my nagging health symptoms, Sarah launched into a monologue framing the exclusion as Mark's unilateral blunder born of his paranoia about competitive overlaps, admitting that the dinner had veered into strategy sessions targeting my negotiations with David, yet her confessions carried undercurrents of her own grievances, revealing a ghost from my past that she had dredged up during her advisory work. A misinterpreted email chain from 3 years back where Tom had provided informal feedback on her early business plan, which she now twisted into evidence of favoritism that had allegedly cost her a key investor. A distortion that struck at the heart of my marriage and forced me to defend the boundaries I had always maintained between personal and professional spheres. This confrontation unearthed a raw vulnerability that clashed with my resolve, tempting me to unleash the full weight of the leaked evidence and sever ties decisively. A reaction that might satisfy the urge for immediate catharsis, but risked alienating a network contact whose insights could prove invaluable later, especially as Sarah's eyes darted to my subtle winces from the neck pain, probing gently about my well-being in a way that blurred sympathy with strategy, making me disagree inwardly with my choice to entertain her overture rather than eject her outright, as if the audience to my unfolding saga might champion a fiercer stance to reclaim dignity without compromise. Instead, I navigated the exchange with layered subtlety, steering the conversation toward my recent consultation with Rebecca and casually mentioning an upcoming review of historical contracts that might illuminate patterns of interference, the implication hanging like a veiled threat that drained the color from Sarah's face as she realized her entangled history could become collateral in a larger legal maneuver, a witty form of retribution that turned her peace offering into a mirror reflecting her own precarious position within the clique, exacting payback through the power of insinuation while preserving my high ground. The encounter left a bittersweet aftertaste as she departed with hurried assurances of discretion, her parting words carrying a cryptic edge about long games and hidden players that sowed fresh seeds of doubt, suggesting that my clever maneuver had not only unsettled her but potentially accelerated countermeasures from the group, a backfire that manifested in the form of jittery energy robbing me of rest despite Tom's eventual return from Seattle, his embrace offering temporary solace as we shared a simple dinner of grilled vegetables and conversation about the day's upheavals, though his concern over my pallor prompted questions about balancing the victory with self-care that I deflected with optimism masking the deeper fatigue. As the evening deepened into night with the bay's fog rolling in like a shroud over unspoken tensions, my phone illuminated once more, this time with a direct message from David Langford himself, its subject line reading immediate concern. Deal integrity at risk, detailing a newly inserted contingency from peripheral stakeholders linked to Mark's orbit that scrutinized the origins of my core algorithms, implying a challenge to their proprietary nature that could delay funding disbursements and expose foundational elements to scrutiny, a wrinkle that not only validated Javier's warnings, but hinted at a shadowy architect behind the deal's facilitation whose identity remained elusive, propelling me into a sleepless vigil where the boundaries between triumph and peril blurred into an ambiguous horizon demanding revelations that might shatter the fragile architecture of my success or elevate it beyond the clique's reach. David Langford's message sliced through the veil of night like a precision incision, pulling me from the tentative comfort of Tom's presence at the dinner table where we had been dissecting the day's revelations over plates of pasta that now cooled untouched. His fork pausing midair as I excused myself to the office with the phone clutched tightly in my hand, the screen's glow casting stark shadows on the walls lined with framed prototypes of my AI interface that symbolized years of solitary innovation now imperiled by the very networks I had sought to transcend. On the call, David's voice maintained its characteristic calm laced with an undercurrent of strategic concern, outlining how the contingency clause had been slipped into the final revisions by secondary investors whose firms intertwined with Mark Riley's venture syndicate, mandating an external audit of Vasquez AI's algorithmic foundations under the pretext of due diligence, a move that could unearth proprietary methodologies derived from my early collaborations and potentially dilute my equity stake if deemed insufficiently original, all while he assured me that his core commitment remained steadfast, but emphasized the need for swift countermeasures to prevent delays in the $120 million infusion that would propel the platform's nationwide deployment for small businesses grappling with economic headwinds. This disclosure not only corroborated Javier's frantic warnings and Rebecca's preemptive analyses, but illuminated the dinner exclusion as the orchestrated opening salvo in a broader campaign to reclaim control over the innovation landscape they viewed as their dominion, forcing me to navigate the treacherous intersection of legal fortifications and personal vendettas where every concession risked eroding the autonomy I had fiercely guarded since bootstrapping from modest roots in East Los Angeles through the rigorous corridors of Stanford's engineering programs, a path marked by sacrifices that now demanded a final reckoning with the ghosts of overlooked potential. Retreating to the balcony after the call concluded with a plan for Rebecca to draft preemptive disclosures by dawn, I inhaled the briny fog rolling in from the bay, its damp chill seeping through my sweater as the city hummed below in a symphony of distant ambitions, reflecting on how the solitary time meal of that fateful evening had inadvertently served as the crucible for this confrontation, stripping away the veneer of collegiality to reveal the raw mechanics of power in Silicon Valley, where success invited as much sabotage as celebration, and the influx of messages that had begun trickling in anew since the headline's virality now felt like harbingers of a shifting tide. Morning arrived with the full deluge breaking over my devices, a torrent of communications from the clique that ranged from Lisa's elaborate voicemail pleading for a reconciliation lunch, where she vowed to make amends for the miscommunication by introducing me to her high-profile clients, her tone infused with that desperate charm she wielded in boardrooms to salvage faltering deals, to Mark's curt email proposing a neutral ground meeting to explore co-investment opportunities that thinly veiled his intent to probe for weaknesses in the audit process. His language stripped of the earlier bravado, as if the newsletter's ripples had eroded his facade of invincibility, while Sarah followed with an extravagant bouquet delivered to my door accompanied by a handwritten card extolling the virtues of forgiveness in women's professional journeys and hinting at insider knowledge she could share to navigate the clause. Her gesture a calculated blend of remorse and manipulation that tugged at the threads of our shared history even as it repelled me with its opportunism. Amid these overtures, genuine notes from longtime supporters outside the elite bubble offered grounding, their words affirming the deal's merit in empowering underserved entrepreneurs amid post-pandemic recoveries, yet the sheer volume created a cacophony that amplified the irony of their sudden accessibility, transforming the exclusion's sting into a symphony of hypocrisy where yesterday's gatekeepers now lined up at the door I had once been barred from entering. Allowing the messages to accumulate unanswered for the initial hours provided a deliberate space for introspection, perched on the balcony with a steaming mug of coffee that masked the persistent twinge in my neck from the thyroid flare-up. a condition whose management had become synonymous with the discipline required to sustain this venture through lean years of rejection and bootstrapped pivots, prompting a deeper contemplation of the personal costs embedded in the triumph, such as the evenings Tom and I had sacrificed to late-night coding sessions or the family gatherings missed in favor of investor calls that now, in hindsight, seemed like bets on a future that demanded constant vigilance against those who resented the underdog's rise. The humor in the absurdity surfaced when I envisioned their private channels erupting with frantic strategizing, the self-proclaimed successful ones reduced to scrambling for relevance in the face of a narrative they could no longer control, a reversal that infused the moment with a wry satisfaction akin to watching overconfident algorithms crash under real-world variables, yet it was tempered by the ethical dilemmas of response. Weighing the catharsis of outright dismissal against the strategic value of selective engagement that could yield intelligence on the audit's architects without compromising my integrity. Ultimately, I composed uniform replies to the clique's overtures, each one a masterstroke of polite deflection, thanking them for their timely inspiration during my period of focused reflection. A phrase that subtly evoked the solo dinner without accusation while underscoring the independence that had birthed the deal. The wording crafted to elicit discomfort through its gracious ambiguity and timed to disseminate via automated sends that maximized collective unease, a final layer of witty retribution that satisfied the urge for payback by mirroring their own indirect tactics back at them, allowing selective doors to remain ajar for potential alliances born of necessity rather than naivety, because in the volatile calculus of tech entrepreneurship, absolute severance could isolate as effectively as exclusion itself. As the day progressed with Rebecca confirming the clause's neutralization through ironclad amendments that fortified the IP protections and David signaling the fund's imminent transfer, the atmosphere shifted toward tentative resolution. With Tom suggesting over a shared lunch of fresh salads from the market that we earmark a portion for that long-deferred vacation to the California coast where we could reconnect away from the digital fray, his optimism a balm against the lingering fatigue that whispered of necessary boundaries in the wake of victory. Yet doubts persisted like stubborn fog patches refusing to burn off under the midday sun, amplified by David's offhand revelation during a follow-up that an anonymous advisor from my early network had quietly advocated for the investment's approval, steering the consortium toward Vasquez AI when initial hesitations loomed. A shadowy figure whose identity eluded specification, but evoked possibilities ranging from Javier's covert support to a long-forgotten mentor dismissed in my climbing years, planting seeds of ambiguity about the true origins of my ascent and whether it stemmed from merit alone or intertwined benefactions that complicated the narrative of self-made triumph. The messages continued to pour in, a mosaic of authentic admiration from peers in the small business advocacy space, mingling with the clique's increasingly fervent appeals. But one encrypted attachment from an untraceable source cut through the noise with chilling directness, stating that while I had secured the battle through resilient maneuvering, the underlying war of influence and resentment endured in the industry's undercurrents, where slights like the dinner were mere symptoms of deeper fractures, urging vigilance against those who never truly forgot a perceived slight. As evening descended with Tom drawing me into a quiet embrace on the couch, the bay's lights twinkling like uncertain stars, I pondered the deal's dawn not as unalloyed victory, but as a multifaceted dawn illuminating both empowerment and exposure, questioning whether the revenges exacted had mended the wounds of exclusion or merely veiled a more profound betrayal woven into the fabric of success itself, leaving the true architect's shadow to linger as an unanswered query that invited reflection on the elusive nature of trust in a world where every win carried the echo of what might have been sacrificed along the way.